Hello, climbers, and welcome back to another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We are super excited about this one. Today, we're going to be talking about FedRAMP from a satellite perspective, and then we're going to kind of start to get into some more of the history and detail out of it and how it might relate to CMMC and how it doesn't relate to CMMC. I think a lot of people throw this term around. They have some assumptions about it, and it is a very significant topic in the CMMC DIB ecosystem. And I thought, who better to bring back on our show than Karen Stanford? Karen, thank you for joining us.
Hey, nice to join.
Okay, so first off, just so that since we're going to be getting into the FedRAMP conversations, why don't you just sort of tell us, Karen, kind of how you came in the back door or the front door, however you want to look at it.
I know,
and your experience with FedRAMP. And so that way our viewers can kind of understand, your history and why you can speak so authoritative about it. And then also, if you could just tell us a bit of the history of FedRAMP and its existence.
Sure. So I might start a little bit with the inception of it.
Okay.
Because as cloud services evolved, the way the government has typically enforced cybersecurity or safeguards, anything that's to do with their data, they could do contractually. So if they have a vendor that they're working with, they would indicate you need to comply with the following requirements. But when the cloud model evolved, you just sign up, right? Like there's no specific contract between AWS and the DoD, AWS and GSA. So there was no means to push down the security requirements to those cloud service providers.
So I didn't think about that. Wow, that's a good point.
Yeah. So, and it was like at the time, it was a big, it was one of those, like there's a bunch of questions swirling about CMMC that was the case with cloud because, agencies were signing up to use it. And the intelligence, everyone in the federal space was freaking out about the risk. So what they ended up doing was the DoD and a bunch of different agencies got together and formed a joint advisory board. I think it's GSA, DoD, and I'm going to forget the other one. But anyway, they all came together and came up with an idea, which was basically that they are going to require any system that's in use in the federal government needs to have a FedRAMP accreditation. And they took the FISMA requirements, basically, that were in scope for a moderate data set in the government, and they overlaid some additional controls related to cloud. And so that created the FedRAMP baseline. And then organizations, there's the way that in CMMC you have a C3 PAO, there are 3 PAOs, independent third-party assessment organizations. And so I worked at one of the biggest ones when they first came out. And so we had a lot of FedRAMP work in the beginning, but those...
Now, at that time, was it predominantly the government needing to use cloud-based apps, and it was just really being pushed by the government's need to want to consume those resources? Is that
I think the initial push seemed to be more that like we're already using this product and now we're going to make them go do this. They were already doing it and they were concerned, and so they were saying you need to do this. So they definitely prioritized by whether the system was in use in the government initially, and those people got priority. But eventually that it also became an avenue to have a marketplace for cloud compliant products for the feds to use. But initially it was like, you need to go get this FedRAMP accreditation. That was a lot of the initial customers being told, right, you need to go do this. Yeah.
Interesting. And now with that push to have that happen, let's just maybe not so, because FedRAMP's been around for quite a while. So, and let's just focus more about the now. So if someone were to now have to go through the process or want to go through the process, because there's things like jabs, which sounds like some kind of boxing match, and ATOs and all this other stuff that just lots of acronyms. Everybody loves those. Can you maybe sort of just explain? So if an organization wanted to get that, what would that process sort of look like, and who could and couldn't go through it? And then let's kind of go from there.
Sure. So FedRAMP currently it's like a consortium of different government representation from both the DoD and the civilian side. And they are the ones who are in charge of it. There's a FedRAMP program management office with a number of people. They have ISSOs. on the DoD side, DISA has some technical representatives in there as well. So if it's a DoD specific system, the DoD is involved. But basically, it's the entity wide way to get your system cloud accredited. And
that's the PMO that everybody talks about when they say
the FedRAMP Program Management Office is the one who will, orchestrate getting you in FedRAMP ready status, getting your accreditation, getting you in the marketplace, all that stuff. Yep. So, and the paths right now, I believe the JAB route, it's currently not available through the website. I think that they are in the process of revising that. I have heard that there will be a sponsorless path in the future, but right now the only way to get a FedRAMP accreditation would be to go the agency route. So that would mean that you have an agency sponsor who either uses your product or wants to use your product and will sign up to make all the risk-based decisions and to do the continuous monitoring that the process requires. So agency is the only way.
So let's pause for just a second, back up a little bit, because I think that's a really good point. You said agency. I'm assuming you mean a federal agency. So
it is a federal agency.
So you have to sweet talk an agency into saying, "Hey, looks nice, huh?" And then they say yes, and then now they're on the hook for making sure. It's kind of like when
they remain compliant. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of like you have your kids come over to your kids have somebody come over, and you're like, "Okay, who are you letting into my house?" And you're like.
Yeah,
you're responsible for it.
Yeah, when you're a cloud sponsor, it's like inviting all the neighborhood kids over into your house. All of a sudden, you're responsible for all of them. So that is becoming increasingly harder. There are, the concerns in the cloud space. So they have a product that actually could probably be well utilized in the federal space, but it needs to be FedRAMP accredited, and to do that, you need a sponsor, and they're not always sure, right? Especially for some of the newer products, they don't know how well it's going to work with their infrastructure or anything like that. So sponsors are leery. Sponsors are not like, "Hey, over here, we'll sponsor you." They're very, very picky, and so that's been frustrating for cloud service providers.
That makes a lot more sense about why it's so hard to get into the space, because you have to. There's more at stake than just stepping into the market space and planting your flag. Now, the JAB route you talked about, can you talk a little bit about what that was and why perhaps it got taken off the table?
Sure. The JAB was the most. The JAB is an assortment of federal representatives who have pretty much no risk tolerance, right? Like if you get a JAB authorization, it means that the representatives from the government have said there's almost no risk in this system. So because they're speaking for the system's ability to be used anywhere in the space, they don't want to accept a lot of risk. So the JAB ATO was extremely portable in that if you get a ATO issued by one agency, you might look at their results and go, "I can't believe they decided to use that product," which federal agencies do. They look at the results and go, "Ooh, too many risks for me." But the JAB, you don't have that problem. There are not going to be a lot of risks that the JAB accepts. So that was considered like the highest value ATO, but it was hard to get because they have no risk appetite at all.
Interesting. And so now you're saying that there might be a self-sought path.
There's talk of there being a sponsorless path of, in FedRAMP 2.0, that there's a route for organizations to because at that point, they can demonstrate their compliance with it without necessarily having to suck in government resources to do it. So there's talk about it, and I don't know, haven't heard too much about it. They're piloting a lot of new things over at FedRAMP. So I know they've taken the JAB list off their website. So I don't know if that will be replaced with something different, but all TBD at this point.
So with that being said, why would someone want to do it? Why would someone want to go the FedRAMP space? And how could that positively or negatively impact their presence in the defense industrial base?
So, the federal government is increasingly pushing, and especially with cloud adoption, their data lives everywhere, right? And so what you'll typically see happening is organizations are getting pressured from their customers or their clients to demonstrate that they have a certain accreditation. And that's usually, that's one that's coming up a lot, especially with the FedRAMP equivalency from the DoD. And then there's also, those who are like, the feds really need to use my product. I should go get an ATO. And, that's a different kind of story. But for a lot of folks, they don't actually want to sell to the government. They need to satisfy their clients who aren't the government, but who have to comply with federal requirements. So those,
Yeah, and it seems like really interesting because you have the the federal government being the consumer, which sort of drove this
Mhm.
ecosystem to grow. But now you have CMMC that's coming. It's happening now. The ecosystem, the assessments at the time of this recording haven't been officially started yet because 32 CFR has yet to be finalized. But we're anticipating any day now. But because of the CMMC requirements for cloud utilization, and because the government is giving you data that's theirs, right? That's what
yeah.
controlled unclassified information is. They say, here's data that is ours, and we're entrusting you with it. And if you're
Mhm.
going to put it in the cloud, you need to put it in a place that's going to be safe, of which FedRAMP is an option. And that's why you're starting to see a lot more organizations that aren't necessarily being consumed by the federal government wanting to participate in that space, so that people in the CMMC space can say, okay, I'm using a FedRAMP approved product. Is that
Yeah.
accurate summarization?
It is. It can be a differentiator. There's a bunch of organizations right now that are trying to be the first to the market in in a certain product type to get a FedRAMP accreditation, because the need's there to use the tool. And now that the DoD is pushing out you know more requirements to industry,
Mhm.
that's definitely becoming a bigger thing.
Gotcha. So let's. I do want to talk about equivalency. You did mention that, but let's save that little nugget of joy to discuss a little bit later in the conversation. But let's get a little deeper into the FedRAMP space. Let's kind of peer behind the curtain. Can you maybe walk us through, uh, like, if someone decided they want to do it, like the life in
Mhm.
the day of someone over the course of year or years, how long, when someone said, I think I'm going to do this, would this whole process take to, hey, here I am holding my accredited, I'm approved,
Yes, you're
what
on the
is that?
marketplace.
Right. Yeah. What does that look like? Can you just sort of explain satellite view for those people that aren't as familiar? Because I don't really know that process very well.
Sure. So I think the first thing that I would recommend if someone is trying to get into this space is to do a gap analysis with somebody who's either a FedRAMP 3 PAO, or there's some good practitioners in this space who have gotten other organizations accredited, right? So I would do a gap analysis with them if you can, to have an understanding as to what FedRAMP is, because one of the biggest shocks that folks have is a lot will assume that it only applies to their SaaS product, not to the the underlying infrastructure that supports
Hmm.
their cloud. So do something like that to get an understanding as to what the requirements are. They'll give you some specific recommendations, and you can make your mind up from there, because the cost is considerable. So, if you do that the gap analysis, the price will range based on the output of the data you get. You could get some really specific detailed recommendations, or you may just have a conversation with someone where they're like, you need to do this or that. So the price will vary, but we're talking at least a couple dozen $1,000s,
Hmm.
2 or 3, to much higher for that gap analysis. And then the assessment process itself is going to be well over 6 figures in most cases. So
Hmm.
so you need to know what you're doing, about this. You need to, offset the cost of what and then there's an annual assessment every year thereafter that people are going to need to complete. That is not a full subset. It's not like completely redoing the first year, but it's about 2/3 of the effort. So, and the price tag matches that. So there
Yeah.
are, there are a
Interesting,
lot
because
of costs.
it's funny because, and you've said this before, we've had you on our first season. If you haven't checked out the first season discussions we've had with Karen, they've been amazing. So definitely go back, hit them up, and hopefully Kelly can put those in the descriptions. But one of the things that you said, which I thought was really great, is you talked about how the FedRAMP space can almost be a little bit of a tea leaves about how the DoD and other organizations in the government are going to possibly want to handle the CMMC space to some extent, because they're trying to learn from the lessons that they've already had from FedRAMP. And that annual reassessment sounds very familiar to how 32
Mhm.
CFR and the 48 CFR have been aligned, that you're going to have those annual attestations about where you're at and the 3-year renewals. So
Yeah.
for the FedRAMP space, is it 3 years like it is with CMMC, or is there a different cadence on that?
There is a different cadence. It's like you do the full set the first year. All the controls are in
Mhm.
scope the first year. And then every year thereafter, there's a set of core controls that will always be evaluated. And then they'll rotate through the remaining controls, selecting at least a third every year. So
Who?
there will be no full reassessment at any point. It's just they're going to
Interesting.
rotate. So
Who
all of the
who
more
decides that?
the FedRAMP PMO, which
Oh,
there's
okay.
really no equivalent for for the CMMC process currently.
Right.
But they'll basically distribute. They will every, when Rev 5 came out, they distributed a new list of control, a new rotation. So they're the ones who control all of that.
And the 3PO that's involved, like how are they involved in that process with the PMO? Is it similar to almost like a joint surveillance? Is that
No, they're really not involved. You need to communicate with the PMO about kicking off assessments, doing things like readiness, so there's some touch points in certain of the official actions, but for the most part, the FedRAMP PMO needs to know that you're doing the assessment, and then they will get the results and they'll say, well, where's your this? Where's that? Why is this testing so bad? Like they'll look it over for certain things. And then they're the ones who are responsible for holding the package, basically. All of the results from our assessments. This is another kind of misconception within the CMMC space, but that entire FedRAMP package is intended for the other federal agencies to use. So if Google gets a FedRAMP ATO, GSA might go and say, hey, we're going to pick up this ATO and use it. So it's very specific, highly secure results that are designed to be used by other federal agencies. So, but they're the ones who coordinate all that. They're the ones who,
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a library, and they just kind of go through the Rolodex and go, hey, this looks great. And then they're kind of going, is that what I'm hearing right?
Well, it's got a new name. It used to be called OMB Max, and now it's got a different name. But it's if you have a CAC or PIV card, you can just go and look at the packages because you're allegedly a Fed because you have the CAC or PIV. But they're the ones who coordinate getting everything in there for the agencies to use and listing you in the marketplace, and that's public. So, once you've finished your readiness, they're the ones who are going to make sure that it's published in the marketplace and that you get that recognition.
I'm glad you mentioned the marketplace. So, you can get in the marketplace, you can search, maybe Kaylee can throw that link on there as well, but you can search it, and it is sort of a marketplace, right? But there's different like labelings of things about the statuses of where they are. Can you maybe talk to us about that and what the significance is and how that might apply in your CMMC journey, either in a positive way or a negative way?
Yeah, so that's a great question because I think that there has been some confusion around it. So in the FedRAMP marketplace, if you have started to engage with the FedRAMP PMO over anything, getting a readiness or getting an assessment, you ultimately may end up, getting listed in the marketplace, and you can have multiple different statuses. So if you've just submitted FedRAMP readiness, you may be listed as in process for FedRAMP readiness, which isn't telling you anything. So it's like if you're a CMMC practitioner, you need to comply with CMMC, and there's someone listed as in FedRAMP readiness in progress on the marketplace, then that doesn't mean anything.
Right,
that means that they're trying to get in there, right? So, but fully accredited, those are the products that are safe to use. So there's also FedRAMP in process, and that, there lots of arguments break out over this, what in process means, whether it's okay to use it or not. I don't know that there's an official answer, and either the guidance are coming out of the DoD for CMMC, but in process is a status showing like now we're working with the 3PAO. We're attempting to get this. It's going on, right? It's happening. So that they just don't have it quite yet.
Wouldn't that be awesome if they had that in the CMMC space to some extent? So
well, that's where I think that they do, and they're going to need to, because where practitioners who are managed service providers or need to comply with CMMC is they need to know what products have the ATOs and don't, and then they also need to know what other managed service providers in the space, like if there's managed service providers who've gotten their infrastructure CMMC compliance and you have a need for that, you need to know who they are.
Right. And that's a big challenge that I'm having as a managed service provider ourselves, is we're working with potential clients and we're like, okay, here's where we're at. And like, we just lay it out. Like, we have had our gap assessment. The organization that is going to do our assessment is the same person that did our gap assessment. We have our assessment scheduled in January. Like, we have it all mapped out, and we kind of tell them what we have. We show them what we have. We're just super transparent in that process. But a lot of other MSPs or other vendors or MSSPs, they're kind of doing this almost stiff arm process, and they're keeping their clients at length. And it would be great if the CMMC, if the Cyber AB had some type of mechanism to kind of say, prove to me where you're at right now, so that when people go to the market space, they can they can have an idea of who they're dealing with and where they're at. I think that would be great.
They're going to have to. I mean, because I don't think anyone's thinking about this operationally right now, because there's going to be agencies, there's going to be internal DoD audits who need to know if something is happened. And the only way to do that right now is, I mean, I guess you could make inquiries through, through the joint surveillance process if there's been any records there, but and through the AB, but it's not readily available.
No,
so problem.
It's very, very interesting concept. Boy, that would be cool if that was the case.
Yeah, I think they'll have to. I think it'll eventually have to happen.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that kind of goes back to the tea leaf idea, right? I mean, I think there's going to be some lessons learned. Now, obviously, the Cyber AB has a big hand on that because of the fact that they're the kind of the governing independent body.
Yeah.
So that's something that they could initiate if they wanted to. Whether they do or not, I have no idea.
That model is different from FedRAMP in that, the PMO is federally funded, and I don't know, so the government can decide to do whatever they want and just have the PMO execute it. And I'm not sure that that's the same relationship with the Cyber AB. So
because they're a nonprofit organization, it has really hamstrung their ability to be as efficient in the market. So Matt Travis, sorry about that, bud.
Yeah,
I'm not sure why they did that to you, buddy, but
they've been hobbled.
Yeah, they've been because the assessments haven't really been starting in earnest, and because of that, it's like they've been just living on life support because the money hasn't been coming in for that organization because the assessments and the whole ecosystem hasn't been fully primed and running.
Yeah.
So. Anyway, so I do want to go further down the path of the FedRAMP space. So now they've got 3PAO, right? And they have gone through talking with the PMO. They've got it scheduled. Now they go through it. Talk me through that assessment as far as in what are the things you can sort of do that you can't, like with CMMC. When they go through, like 60% is a straight fail. Like there's no thanks for the fish, appreciate you trying, but it's a big F.
Yeah.
It's not met. How's that different in the FedRAMP?
And this is another interesting distinction between CMMC and FedRAMP is that it's a risk-based process. So there will be, we've certainly, when I worked at our 3PAO, we certainly said you guys aren't going to get an ATO, right? Like, we could just tell you right now, you're missing too much. But, we know that there are critical showstoppers. You'll see a lot of those control requirements in the FedRAMP readiness template. So like, can you comply with certain mandates? Those are going to be showstoppers, right? But outside of that, it is a process whereby they put their package and their test results out for the feds to say if it's good enough or not. So there's no minimum bar, but your 3PAOs will tell you if it's just a no-go for the most part, but there's no number or anything.
How many controls are we talking for a moderate?
Well, I don't know about, we're at 5. I think there's 400 something now, but it really depends on the controls, right? Like if there are a bunch of documentation findings, I don't know if I really care too much if I found that if they didn't have a policy saying that something needed to be done, but they were doing it. For me, you could have a ton, right? Like it's not going to take you too long to update that documentation. It's all a risk-based approach. So all of the decisions should be made from that perspective. There's no shortcutting. There's certain controls that I wouldn't expect to get your ATO if you can't do DNSSEC or if you can't do FIPS or you can't do multi-factor. Those are showstoppers. But outside of that, it's really just somebody looking at it and saying, those aren't that big a deal. Or I think those are problems, but those are easy problems to fix. So we're okay with it.
Oh, interesting. So is it a finite set of controls or is it risk based on where they're coming from? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, it does. The set of controls sometimes, based on if if you have a federal client, they may say you need to be FedRAMP moderate, you need to be FedRAMP high. So the categorization you'll have in FedRAMP is based on whatever data type you can support. So if you have a FedRAMP moderate, you'll have one set of controls. And if you have a FedRAMP high, you will have additional controls. And then there are things from DISA, DISA IL 4, 5, and 6, which are additional overlays of control. So your client or the need will dictate what the level needs to be. And then the number of controls is based on that. And then you can further refine it based on if they're inheriting stuff from the cloud.
So who's deciding that that needs to happen? Is it the type of data and what you're trying to accomplish, or is it a combination of all of those?
It's supposed to be the organization who is seeking the FedRAMP accreditation. They should document in their system security plan all the controls that are their responsibility and those that are out of scope. And they can choose if they want to be moderate or high. Like if you're going into the FedRAMP marketplace, let's say the sponsor list routes up, you can pick to go moderate or high and then just choose the baseline and you'll get assessed against that. But for the most part, people go in at moderate because high is a significant uplift, and most of the data you're going to see in the federal space is going to be moderate, though some are different. There's a lot more sensitive data in like intelligence agencies. So
yeah, gotcha. So then let's say company A, right? They would pick a consultant or a firm or a body, whoever it is, hire somebody on a contract basis, whatever that might be, but they're going to help them come up with their plan of attack about how they're going to do it. And then they're going to engage a 3PAO to help them.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that relationship between the organization that is going to get assessed and the 3PAO. What type of collaboration is allowed, not allowed? Can they say, we feel like this is not quite right, maybe you could make this kind of adjustment? What type of conversations are allowed? Because in the CMMC space, like that is like a big no-no. You have to basically take the gavel out and say, pass or fail. And then that's it. You can't really talk a lot about it. Is it different in the FedRAMP space?
It is different in that CMMC, like even the 800-171, I don't think the prohibitions that CMMC has aren't baked into 800-171 per se, but all the other frameworks in the federal space require the assessor to make a recommendation. So we can tell you explicitly what you need to do to fix the problem, and we're required to. It's a form. What we have to do when we record our findings is to do our write-up to indicate if it's passed or failed, to do a risk analysis on it, to rate it low, moderate, high, et cetera.
So the auditor's doing the analysis.
Yes. So all of the FedRAMP 3PAOs have to, every single finding has to have a whole extra set of work where you discuss the risk, the security impact analysis, the likelihood, rate the risk, and then issue a recommendation. So there are prohibitions, like if I am writing policies and procedures in an SSP for a company, I can't be their assessor, right? So you can't do advisory consulting, but the recommendations are part of the process. If you don't make recommendations in FedRAMP, you will get dinged. You will be be stepped back to write the recommendation.
What is the that would be so nice. And
yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's all coming from the cap, right? That these hamstring situations are just really.
I am frustrated in that I feel like that is due to the fact that they set up RPOs, and I'm not dissing any of the RPOs, but I feel like they want to draw a line between the two. So now we assessors can't make recommendations, and for me, that doesn't make sense.
Just for people who are tuning in who don't understand what the heck the cap is, I'm not talking about a cap you can put in. What I'm talking about is the CMMC assessment plan. So the Cyber AB, which is the body that the C3POs that are doing the assessments for the CMMC space, they have to report to and follow the Cyber AB body. And they have the CAP, which is this document that outlines how assessments are supposed to be done. It's in a proposed phase for a good reason, because it's not very good. Just going to call it out and say that. It is actually probably one of the biggest frustrations about this ecosystem as a whole for me. And I think if you rewrite that, it could make the CMMC ecosystem considerably more manageable if they.
I would agree, and my criticisms of the current way that they're doing it is that it wasn't designed to scale. It wasn't designed to be facilitative of ongoing things. Like their FedRAMP equivalency. Now they're reevaluating that every time somebody using the product goes through, right? So what does that mean if they opt to rescind FedRAMP equivalency for a product that is being used on active contracts? I feel like they haven't thought a lot of this through, and all of this will, they'll have to solve these problems later. But it is frustrating to me to see the cap miss so much that we need to know.
For me as an implementer, trying to guide and work and help and assist clients get through that process, let me just tell you, I am going to push it further out to make sure they're ready before I send them through, just because there's no recommendation. And I want to circle back around and ask you about what type of corrective actions and what that looks like in the FedRAMP space, because in the CMMC space, if you fail 61% of the 110 objectives, the controls that are given, it's a fail. There is no corrective action that can be done about that in any time frame. It's just a reassessment over again once you've got it done. And that is a big punch in the gut in any area of your body that you also want to get punched in. And it's just not fun. If they had it,
the cost sure is what's frustrating, is that, you know, like what if FedRAMP allows, like we would commonly, we would perhaps charge a firm fixed price P for the assessment. And if you guys tested really badly, we might have a bucket of T&M hours for remediation if you wanted us to keep testing a little bit more, right? And that's not really an option here, and I don't understand it. And I feel that the constraints are due to, the DIBCAC wanting to manage the scheduling more or less.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is in and out, this is open or closed, and that's just again not how things work. So I'm hoping that their engagement currently, and those prohibitions currently are due, but they're not actually. Now they've worked it into some of the rulemaking, but that once it moves out and they're not involved, that C3PAOs could be more lax about it. That, your assessment may take course over 8 weeks, where, you're accepting evidence as they do it, because that is certainly acceptable in FISMA and FedRAMP. And I feel like they've written a process designed to help them as a unit not have scheduling problems, but in the real world, that's not going to be sustainable.
No, it's definitely not. So you touched a little bit about what kind of course correction you can have during your audit process. And that process could go over an extended period of time, given the fact that it's so significantly different from CMMC assessment processes. Can you touch on that a little bit more about what corrective actions can be done and how the auditing body can participate in that?
I don't, quite honestly, it's not currently in the CAP, and I've had differing experiences in real life. I attended one where they would accept nothing. You went in with what you went in with, and even if you hadn't given them something, or, something was already in place, but you hadn't provided it to them, that was it. There were no changes. That was a finding. And then I was in one where they would allow 5 documentation changes and, no technological changes. And I don't know what they're doing currently, but again, it's not in the CAP. Yeah, it's not in the CAP, so we don't know. And
so in the FedRAMP space, what's that like?
That is really between the 3PAO and the cloud service provider. So, what we would do often is, like, if we get into it in a little bit, we're like, you guys have a lot of findings, you have a lot of problems, where, if we can redeploy our resources and regroup later, that would often be the case. But I think that the CMMC, the folks who are making this decision haven't ever been in charge of running like a transactional audit team, because it's just such a common occurrence that things stretch or things move or things, people aren't ready, and you need to come back and do some retesting later.
And that seems so reasonable, because then in that situation, you could be like, okay, I feel like I'm 100%, but in reality, when the auditor looks, you might be at 90. But that 10%, if you work with an auditor that's reasonable, they can make the appropriate recommendations on the things, and you can correctively course correct, get where you need to go, then get the pass. Everybody's happy, and you get your certification, and you move on.
The goal is to have the risks be fixed. I see no objective in, nothing is gained by kicking them out of the process, leaving the risks unaddressed for multiple months. And then, for me, no, that's not the way you manage risk. But I think they're solving problems as they come up without thinking about what this is going to look like in a few years. And wow. I think I think they'll have to evolve a little bit to accommodate some of the problems we're seeing like this.
Yeah, I just didn't know that was how FedRAMP worked. And man, that's been hugely helpful for me, just trying to have a better understanding of that process. And it makes me have perhaps some hope that some sanity of reading the tea leaves from how things happen in FedRAMP, if they could take that, maybe even some of the ISO processes, and just sort of apply that to CMMC, so many more companies would go for their audit, because there's a greater chance of pass, right? Versus, I feel like in some situations I've talked with and had and watched conferences and seen auditors, I would be scared that they almost would dunk on you just because they just want to make a point,
Well,
and you're
that's
like,
the concern that, because
like what?
they're staffing up people where we don't know if the person doing your audit is new,
Right.
and I think that the risk determination factor, the DoD hasn't been big on risk determination. They have avoided it entirely with CMMC, but that is such a critical part of FedRAMP, where you can say, okay, this isn't 100% compliant, but look at all the compensating controls. I think
Mhm.
it's okay. And
Right.
that's also not possible in CMMC.
Gosh, that would be great. Wow, I didn't know that. That's very eye-opening. Thank you
It
about
is,
that.
yeah.
So let's talk a little bit because we're running on time. But man, this is such a great enlightening. I'm learning so much just from
Yeah,
talking to you.
yeah.
But let's talk a little bit more about the need in the CMMC ecosystem. We sort of touched on it. Why FedRAMP is so important to help make the CMMC journey successful.
Yeah, for sure. So, cloud service providers present a unique attack vector that, traditional infrastructures don't have to deal with. And the whole multi-tenancy part is risky.
Mhm.
And that if you're putting your federal data into a cloud service provider who's maybe got business to business connections with somebody else who's going to get
For
hacked,
sure.
there's
Yeah.
a whole bunch of risks in extending your data into a boundary you don't own or control. So, FedRAMP is going to make sure that there's, guardrails on, tenant separation between customers and ensuring that they're forcing multi-factor for infrastructure. I think one of the things that's hard for companies to, especially a lot of software development, is the continual requirements for patching and scanning and remediating those expeditiously. That's a lot of work, for some organizations. But that is, those are the sorts of things that the assurances that an organization will get that the federal data that they are the steward of is going to have in those spaces.
And so many MSPs and other organizations are just turning to vendors going FedRAMP, 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 FedRAMP. And the vendors are like, okay, I guess I need to get FedRAMPed. And can you maybe talk about some of the misconceptions? One of the things you said was underlying infrastructure and some of those things that happen for these vendors. And I have a feeling, and I know that probably some vendors are thinking or talking to you or other people, and they don't really understand what they're
They
looking down the barrel of.
don't. And I think that a lot of folks don't understand if FedRAMP is applicable or not. So, it's hard to get into all the different scenarios, but basically you have to own a cloud service a cloud service product that where the model is largely that people sign up for it, right? Like it's not a contract thing, because if it's a contract thing, if you have a contract between a managed service provider and someone who needs CMMC and the requirement is for CMMC, then they can push the contract language down. Cloud is really only applicable in absence of the ability to push the language down via contract.
Because the DFARS can't come to you because you don't have a contract for
Right,
the flow
because your
through.
product doesn't enable contracts. So,
Right.
so that's something you really need to think about because I think
Wow.
in
Yeah.
this space, especially, a
Mhm.
lot of people are saying, well, you're a cloud service provider, but if it's still a custom contract between, whoever needs CMMC and you, then they should push in the language, and potentially push in the language for FedRAMP equivalency if appropriate. But if you have a cloud service provider product that meets the definition of cloud by NIST and there's no contract, the only other option is FedRAMP equivalency or FedRAMP accreditation.
Mhm. Now, we've opened the door now. We've said it. So the equivalency or accreditation,
Mm.
there is a lot of stink about that. And memos have been flying around. People have taken sides. Can you just satellite view without getting into a lot of detail? Because we could do a whole
Yeah,
podcast on that. In a few minutes, could you summarize that
a
whole
few minutes.
situation? Yeah.
I need more time.
Yeah.
No, I think in a nutshell, I think the DoD and its DFARS language acknowledge that data living in the cloud in the DIB needs to have controls, and they stated that there should be FedRAMP equivalency. And when this first came out, like 2016, 2017, my company was getting requests to do 80171 evaluations on these clients who had been told by their contracting officer, right? But I've lost the train of thought. We're We're gonna have to back up. What was your question?
So my question is, so when you're looking at the equivalency versus
Oh, the equivalency.
the equivalency versus the accredited. So I kind of messed up there. So let's dive more into the accredited versus equivalency with FedRAMP, and
Yeah.
in the 7012 DFARS, it kind of opened that door of equivalency, trying to
Right.
make some clear communication to those organizations out there. They're going to have controlled and classified information. If they're going to be storing that somewhere else and it's not in FedRAMP, they wanted to kind of put some requirements on those people to say, okay, if you're storing it in the cloud and it's not FedRAMP, it at least needs to be FedRAMP-ish. And everybody sort of kind of said, okay, that makes sense.
Right.
But as usual, everybody starts pushing the boundaries, and there was a lot of, hemming and hawing and finger pointing and accusations. And then the memo came out and they basically just slammed the flag down. Can you sort of summarize that?
Yeah, I think it again goes a little bit back to the lack of risk management, because FedRAMP equivalency kind of, FedRAMP relies on there being a sponsor to say, we think your results from your 3PAO are good enough to be FedRAMP. But absent that, it's just a set of results done by a 3PAO that could show all findings, right? So there's no bar on, there's no number, like you said, for CMMC. There is no bar. And so I think the DoD, realizing that problem, decided to mandate 100% compliance, which anyone in the FedRAMP space knows is just, you only get that for a sliver of time, and it means nothing, and it's almost impossible to accommodate, because FedRAMP allows for POAMs, which the DoD is not allowed for CMMC, and apparently now FedRAMP equivalency. But a POAM is when your assessor comes in and says, this group of people aren't getting multi-factor or whatever. That finding gets listed in something called a plan of action and milestones, or POAM, and the feds will track your completion of that. So it's a list of things that we know you need to fix and the timelines in which you need to fix them. And those timelines are mandated by FedRAMP. So like a higher critical vulnerability needs to be fixed in 30 days, moderate 90, lower informational 180, right? So that process isn't there. There's no sponsor for equivalency. There's no buddy at the wheel for equivalency. So they have opted to mandate, again, the 100% compliance, which again is just going to be a brief sliver in time where they scan clean for a split second and nothing needs patching. And then after, so you immediately fall out of compliance with that. Literally, sometimes the next hour, if a new vulnerability, if a new patch comes out and a component doesn't have it, you're out of compliance, right? But I don't think that they, again, don't want to have they don't have the infrastructure to manage that, or they don't want to manage that. So they're saying 100%. And that, again, with no sponsor, FedRAMP will have a continuous monitoring process that both the FedRAMP PMO and your sponsor or the JAB will be involved in, where they're looking, you have to send them your scan results, and you can be like, you guys are no longer patching, that type of thing, and make sure that they continue to comply. Mm-hmm. And that is not present for FedRAMP equivalency. And to address the risk, they've just gone 100% compliance, which very frustrating for everyone.
So let's talk about the different conversations I've heard from some of the government bodies. There's been some discussion. Some people have been saying some things at some conferences and webinars that are hinting that there might be some type of adjustment about the equivalency. Again, this is just subjective. There's no rule that we can refer to, but what's your thoughts about what you've been hearing?
I haven't heard much on the equivalency front. That's all DoD, but I have heard on the FedRAMP, that there is a sponsorless path being evaluated. Mm-hmm. And I think that's necessary. I don't know how it will work. I don't know any of the details, but I've heard rumors that there would be a sponsorless path where you could get FedRAMP equivalency through this route that wouldn't need to be, continually monitored by the DoD. It would work more like the model for FedRAMP does currently, which is you get one annual you get the one full assessment, then a subsequent annual, and you just have to patch and resolve your patchable issues and stuff. So
that seems very
would be
reasonable.
preferable. Yeah, preferable for the DIB for sure.
So let's talk now more about cloud providers like Microsoft, for example. They have multiple offerings. For example, they have their commercial offering, they have their GCC offering, and they have their GCC High offering. How does FedRAMP's status impact those three different products that Microsoft offers? Just in a very high level, obviously, we could do a whole podcast about that.
It's a controversial topic. So,
Yeah.
so the FedRAMP equivalency doesn't require an ATO. So the product right now that has a FedRAMP ATO is FedRAMP GCC, not GCC High, which a lot of people are using or need to use for CMMC because of ITAR clauses. So currently, the version of 0365 and everything that you need to use isn't yet FedRAMP accredited, and I'm a little frustrated again here with the DIBCAC's insistence about 100% compliance. So,
Right.
They are not happy with GCC High because it's not 100% compliant. But again, in FedRAMP, that's not a requirement. So, if GCC High were to attain a FedRAMP moderate ATO, then they should be fine for use. But right now, unfortunately, the only one with an ATO is GCC High. And then now we have the mess with FedRAMP equivalency that we're dealing with without a lot of answers. So it's leaving a lot of folks confused about which products they can or should use. And but you can, at this point, I'm pretty sure you can use GCC High. I know Microsoft doesn't say so, but we have been recommending it for CUI usage for ages, just because it's got a FedRAMP ATO, right? It's FedRAMP equivalent. So, but yeah, if you do have ITAR or EAR restrictions, then you're going to need to use GCCI, and currently it does not have. I don't believe it has FedRAMP equivalency. There's no marketplace to check for FedRAMP equivalency, right? So I don't think it has that, and it's not listed as having an ATO in the marketplace. So that's very confusing for folks.
And Richard Wickman and Robert Metzger, we're actually going to have him on our podcast later.
Oh, cool.
And so we're going to be talking more about that specifically, and we're super excited about that. And Richard came out with a blog that had a lot of information that provides some additional guidance. So we're looking forward to having him on here to drill into this, because organizations just like us are using GCC High, and they're putting a lot of faith in there. I think it's well placed. But it doesn't mean that there won't be some skullduggery or weirdness.
They're not bulletproof. They're not bulletproof right now.
From other organizations, like the government or DIBCAC, or somebody gets a hair somewhere and starts making things a little bit harder.
That's my concern with equivalency. Yeah, because like right now, GCC High is not bulletproof because they don't have a FedRAMP ATO, and the requirements for moderate are 100% compliance. And with the way, I don't know how the DIBCAC is going to continue to do risk management for anyone who's FedRAMP equivalent. But right now, I believe they're asking OSCs who use the products to make sure that they have the ATO and that it's maintained, and the package and documentation is all kept up to date.
So interesting.
Very interesting. Yeah, I don't think that that's going to be sustainable in that and that's subject to people's interpretation. So now we can have products that have been used and have been accredited, have been used in accredited CMMC environments, who somewhere down the road someone has decided you cannot use. And I understand that's happened for GCC High, and it's concerning to me because it looks, I feel like everyone thinks we're in an experimental stage now, and word goes out, oh, you can't use GCC High. That's not how it should work. This is going to be different when the products are in use in the federal space. Yeah. And so there has to be something that's going to be more enduring than an ephemeral 100% compliant tick mark that they're going to need to comply with at all times.
And just kind of a realistic, like, put your real thinking cap on. Like, the government has a tremendous amount of infrastructure in GCC High and the infrastructure that they're utilizing. So it would be madness to assume that they would then just detonate themselves at the same time with some.
The government needs a GCC High type environment. Like, there's a need for it. So to have under the guise of CUI, this is not just the the DoD. There are ITAR and EAR requirements for clients who need to use GCC High for civilian agencies as well. And right now, apparently there's no option, and that's the sort of, stuff that is not going to be sustainable long term.
Right.
So.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us. I mean, this has been super enlightening. I took a lot of notes and learned a lot through the conversation with you. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Happy to be here.
So if you guys don't know much about Karen, let's, check out her on LinkedIn. Karen, can you share a little bit about how people can connect with you?
Sure, you can connect to me through LinkedIn, or I have a website, archstonesecurity.com, and a YouTube channel where I put more educational content related to NIST compliance out. So any of those methods, I'm happy to answer any questions. Great. And I do FedRAMP consulting for both advisory and assessments.
Yeah, if you're a vendor or you're an organization thinking about trying to take that space, I could think of nobody better to talk to than Karen.
Awesome. Thank you.
So thank you all again for joining us today. This has been super enlightening. It's a space that I don't think has gotten a lot of shined light from the DIB and CMMC space. I think there's plenty of people who understand it very, very thoroughly, but they're in their own lane. Me, for example, I have never swam in those waters, so this was hugely helpful for me. Thank you so much, Karen, for just really being transparent, as you always are, which we deeply appreciate.
Absolutely.
So if you haven't been following us on any of the media that we have, please do. We do appreciate those likes and follows. If you have suggestions, please hit us up on those, because we want to know about how we can be better for you. And we always are trying to, follow the methodology of a high tide raises all boats. So, and again, everybody, thank you for joining us, and keep on climbing. Until next time.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.